Apropos of improving the mind, you probably have often heard the question that newspapermen and journalists often ask people. Namely, if you were shipwrecked on an island and could have only one book, which one would you choose? The best answer was given by G.K. Chesterton, who said he would like to have Thomas's Practical Guide to Shipbuilding.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hey, Catholic pilgrims, welcome to week 31. This week's topic is probably going to be one of the most fun topics that we're going to talk about, at least as far as I can tell. And we're going to be talking about reading. Remember, this is the learning section. And I have loved reading since I was a little girl, and my mom used to take me to the library and I would get a whole huge stack of books, and I've been reading ever since. Of course, Bishop Sheen is going to bring some more intellectual thoughts about reading than maybe you're used to, but it's still a really great topic and one I'm going to really enjoy discussing with you on the other side of our readings. So, the 3 key points this week are mental garbage, leisure, and intelligent reading. Number 31, reading. Within the past year, nonfiction books surpassed in sales fiction or novels. This is a happy trend in our contemporary civilization. For the reader of a serious book must always keep an active mind, whereas the reader of fiction may be passive and accept the doings and the musings of the characters as they are unfolded. It is interesting to make a comparison of the book reviews in the London Times Literary Supplement and the book reviews in many of our leading newspapers. Just for the fun of it, we counted the number of novels reviewed in one of the book review sections of an American newspaper and found 25 were reviewed in one issue, counting as nonfiction everything that was not a novel. There were only 13 serious books reviewed. Turning to the London Times Literary Supplement, we counted 9 novels reviewed as compared with 40 works of nonfiction. The novel has value and oftentimes can present a moral or economic problem in the concrete far better than can be done in the abstract writing of nonfiction. While each person is entitled to his preferences, the fact still remains that for the complete development of the mind, there must be serious and intelligent reading, not just reading. A king of Poland in the 18th century, speaking of those who read too much and absorbed too little, reflected, quote, "A well-read fool is the most pestilent of blockheads. His learning is a flail which he knows not how to handle, and with which he breaks his neighbor's shins as well as his own." Unquote. As the stomach can suffer from indigestion, so can the mind. If too many ideas are poured into it, and there are not sufficient juices of the intellect to absorb them, a queer kind of literary constipation follows. As Milton said, one can be deep versed in books and shallow in himself. Not long ago, we were talking to a young college student who boasted of his vast reading and said that Freud developed the idea of the inferiority complex. When it was suggested that possibly he was confusing Freud with Adler, his remark was, "Well, I ought to know. I visited Vienna, and that is where Freud lived." Many people live under the illusion that they have read more than they actually have. There is hardly anyone who has been through college who does not live under the false belief that he has read Darwin's Origin of Species or Spencer's Fairy Queen. It has been said that some of the great geniuses of the past never read half as much as the mediocre geniuses today. But what they read, they understood and incorporated into a much deeper dimension of knowledge. There is a world of difference between a mind that has in it 10,000 bits of uncorrelated information and a mind that is like an organism in which one factor truth is functionally related to every other truth, as the heart is related to the legs and arms. The wisest of men reads out of a philosophy of life as he eats out of a philosophy of health. Mental garbage is as scrupulously avoided by the eyes in reading as another kind of garbage is avoided by the lips. On the other hand, certain, quote, hard reading, such as Plato, Aquinas, Toynbee, pass like iron in the blood and into the mind, giving it consistency and strength. The easiness with which reading matter can be procured today has much to do with the ministering to lower tastes. Those who had a taste for philosophy in the days of Aristotle, a yearning for poetry in the days of Dante, for metaphysics in the days of Abelard, and for the sacred science when the monasteries held all the treasures of knowledge, spared no effort to absorb learning. But now that reading is accessible in every drugstore and city corner, the discrimination has decreased with the availability. After a time, useless reading weakens the mind rather than strengthens it. Then reading becomes an excuse for the mind to lie dormant while thoughts are poured over it like chocolate over ice cream. The mind is like an hourglass through which ideas pass like sands, nothing remaining. We, in the modern age, have more leisure than those of a century ago, but we know less what to do with it. Our education is rightly preparing us to make a living, but let education not forget that since we have more leisure than working hours, it might do well to teach us how to spend our leisure. Give a person a taste for the intellectual, the spiritual, and the moral, and you make them happy. As a Latin poet put it, Immolet mores, nec sinit esse ferox. Reading civilizes conduct and keeps it from becoming barbarous. I was recently back in Kansas, where I'm from, visiting family, and I went down to visit my grandmother in her small little Kansas town. And I cannot remember a time when my grandmother did not have like a stack of books by her couch that she was reading through. Her house has always been filled with books. She has always encouraged reading within me and my cousins. And she's the one that got me kind of started on the classics, Pride and Prejudice, Black Beauty, all of those things. It was because of her influence that I would even consider the classics. Now, I read some of them with her, and then we would watch the movies. And later into my, teenage years, I stepped away from the classics, and we'll get to that in just a minute, but I've come back to them. And it's so important that we come back to them or even start on the classics. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, I was in her house recently and I was looking at one of her bookshelves that's just packed full of books. And it's just like an insight into who my grandmother is. She loves poetry. Oh my gosh, she has read poetry her entire life. And when I was young, she would try to read it to me and my cousins, and we would just be bored out of our minds. But I appreciate it now, and I understand what she was trying to do. She was trying to cultivate a love for that particular way of writing, that art form. And, when you're young, you just don't get it. And poetry can be difficult to decipher sometimes, but she would always read it to us with such emotion, and I could tell that it meant something to her. Anyways, I was looking through a lot of the books on her shelf, Many of them are classics that as a kid I just completely ignored. And now I looked at them with new, fresh eyes and I was just like squealing with delight because she's got so many good ones. And I love old books. I love the way they smell. I love the way they feel. They're just magical in a way. But I have been reading since I was young. My mother always used to take me to the library when I was little. Those are some of the fondest memories I have of being with her when I was little. It's our time spent at the library and her taking me home with all my books and us reading together. I absolutely cherish those memories. And so just for fun, I thought I'd tell you some of my reading habits and some of my favorites. So my all-time favorite book is To Kill a Mockingbird. I absolutely love the book. I absolutely love the movie. They have been my favorites since I first read and watched the book and the movie. My favorite, probably overall, nonfiction writer, modern day, is Dean Koontz. I just think he's got a unique way of writing. He's Catholic, and so he has a way of infusing Catholicism into his writing, but not in a blatant way. If you're Catholic and you're strongly Catholic, then you pick up on it. And if you're not, then it probably just brushes right past you. Or you might see that there's some symbolism or that he's getting at something religious, but he does it in a very unique, kind of subtle way. And I really appreciate that. I do really like to read nonfiction books. I didn't used to like them, but I really do enjoy them now. So something that I do is I have a little order that I go in. So I read a fiction book, then I read a nonfiction book, and then I read a religious book of some kind, and then I start the process over. That helps me to not just read novels all the time because, like Bishop Sheen says, novels are easy. We can just sit by passively and just soak it all in. What I do love that he says about novels is he says, the novel has value and oftentimes can present a moral or economic problem in the concrete far better than can be done in the abstract writing of nonfiction. I think that's very true. I've been reading a lot of Charles Dickens lately. I just finished the book Great Expectations, and he definitely deals with moral issues, and it's presented in story form. And so you don't feel like you're being preached at, but you can really sense the message that he's trying to get across. And it's more emotional for us because we get connected to the characters and we know what they should be doing. And then when they don't do what is right and good and true, it bothers us. And I think a novel can present that even better than a nonfiction book. So anyway, those are the things that I go through. I also have fond memories of both of my grandfathers reading the newspaper. And I mean literally like front to back. I have memories of walking into the living room and there they are behind the pages of the newspaper, and they would read all of it, and it would take them some time, but they read it all, and they had such a good understanding of things that were going on in the world, things that were going on in their local community. And I think a lot of that had to do with their reading of the newspaper every day religiously in an effort to know what was going on in the world. We don't really do that anymore because most newspapers are all online. Nobody really wants to read a newspaper front to back online. In fact, nobody does. And so we've gotten away from that, and I think that's a true tragedy. I know a lot of people love technology. I mean, I like technology, but there's something about having the tangible in your hands, like a newspaper, like a good book, that just cannot be replaced by a screen. So another interesting thing about being at my grandma's is she was talking to my daughter, and she was sharing with her love of reading and everything. And she says, when I go to the library, I get a number of books. And when I bring them home, I read the first chapter of each book. And in reading the first chapter of each book, that lets me know which one I want to start with and in what order I would like to read them. And both my daughter and I thought that was such a cool idea. And I've been thinking about it a lot. And I realize, this is something I didn't know about my grandma. I didn't know she did that. But I do the same thing with magazines. So when I get a magazine, I will read the first paragraph of every article that's in the magazine. And then based off of my curiosity level, I will decide which one most piques my interest, and I will start with that one and work my way through. I don't read it straight front to back, but eventually I will read an entire magazine, but in a very jump around way. And I do the same thing as my grandmother, just with a magazine. And I thought that was pretty cool. Maybe it's written in our DNA. Who knows? But let's get back to Bishop Sheen and what he has to say about reading. So on page 112, he talks about how a lot of people think that they read more than they really do. And I would definitely agree with this. He says, not long ago, we were talking to a young college student who boasted of his vast reading and said that Freud developed the idea of the inferiority complex. And he felt like he knew Freud because he'd been to Vienna, and he says, well, that's where Freud lived. But he probably had never really read anything by Freud. And this is something that, obviously has been around for a while, that people think that they have read something just because they have visited an author's home or visited their home country or something like that, but they haven't actually read the works. I find this to be particularly true with Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. A lot of people that are in favor of socialism or communism will talk in a very gloating manner about Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. But what I find is that most people have never even read it. They don't even know what's in it. And they speak of it as if they know because they've heard other people talk about him and speak very well of him and speak very well of communism. And so one thing I always ask them is, well, have you read the Communist Manifesto yourself, or have you just heard about other people who have read it and like what he has said? And most of them have not read it. In fact, I would say I have never met a person who is for, socialism or communism who has actually read what is in the Communist Manifesto. And I always tell them, well, before you go in support of this, I would read it first. And I've run into this too. A lot of atheists think that they know the Bible because they've read other people talking about the Bible, or they've read just a little bit of the Bible, the parts that they don't like, and they take it out of context and try to use out of context verses as weapons against Christians. Bishop Sheen goes on to say, it has been said that some of the great geniuses of the past never read half as much as the mediocre geniuses today, but what they read, they understood and incorporated into a much deeper dimension of knowledge. I think there's a sort of competition out in our world today where, especially in first world countries, we have to present ourselves as people who have read just stacks upon stacks of books. And we want to impress people with what we've read and how much we've read. And, it just seems as if, people want to read, not because of a love of learning, but more as a way to puff themselves up. It seems like it's more of an ego thing instead of a true, genuine, desire to engage your mind and grow in knowledge and be able to use that knowledge in a real and true way. And a point that he makes that I think is something to key in on. He says, but now that reading is accessible in every drugstore and city corner, the discrimination has decreased with the availability. And you think about it. You walk into a Barnes and Nobles, there are an overwhelming number of books and magazines in that place. I mean, where do you start? How do you know if an author is going to be good? How do you know if you can take what they write seriously, if they're a nonfiction author? It's just a bit overwhelming because like he says, it's just everywhere. It's just so accessible. We can get online and we can read literally any article we want to. You don't even really have to try. I mean, it's like books are just falling in your lap. And so consequently, what this has done is allowed us to just kind of read what's easy because it's so widely available. Back when I was a teenager, I used to read a lot of Stephen King. I really enjoyed reading Stephen King, and my parents probably let me read Stephen King far earlier than I ever should have. But I kind of like to be scared, and Stephen King, whether you love him or hate him, he has a really great imagination. I like more of his earlier works. I'm not saying that you have to read him or anything. I don't read him anymore because some of his material is just not good, in my opinion. He's a good writer. He's an excellent writer. I just don't like the material that he's putting out anymore. And Stephen King is just one of those authors that just sucks you into a story and you just go into this other world, basically. And you don't have to really think that hard. And I remember one time I tried to pick up A Tale of Two Cities during this period of my life. And gosh, I got on the first page and I got to the bottom and I was like, what in the world? Nothing about any of this makes a bit of sense. And I gently laid it aside and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not reading that. Fast forward years later, homeschooling my kids, A Tale of Two Cities is part of their curriculum for high school. And I always read the books with my children because it gives me a chance to talk with them about it, and they like my reading voice, and it's just a good bonding time for us. I will miss it when I don't get to do that anymore. Anyway, we get to A Tale of Two Cities, and I pull it out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so painful. I didn't tell them that, but I'm like, okay, here we go. You have to read this. This is part of their curriculum. And once you get past the first several pages, it has become one of my favorite books. I mean, it's just fantastic. I just love it. When my oldest and I got to the end of that book, we both just sat there in silence for like a good 5 minutes, not knowing what to say because it was so impactful. And, there were tears and just an excellent, excellent book. And had I never been forced to read it because of my kids' homeschooling curriculum, what a treasure I would have missed out on. And so because of the ease of reading these days, because we have such a wide variety of reading that is available to us, and when we went to do what's just easiest, a lot of people aren't doing the hard readings. He talks about, there's the hard readings such as Plato and Aquinas and Toynbee pass like iron in the blood and into the mind, giving it consistency and strength. We don't do enough hard reading these days because we're scared of it. We're not used to it. Oh, they don't talk like we do today. I don't know what they're saying. But these kinds of books are invaluable and they can teach us so, so much. So as we wrap up here at the end, I just want to list off a couple of tips or points about reading that maybe you could consider incorporating into your life. And the first one is read hard things. You don't have to read hard things all the time, but we should read hard things. I did this with St. Thomas Aquinas' book, the Summa, as well. When I first opened it up and I read the first couple of pages, I just sat there and was like, okay, well, this is going to require a lot of focus from me. And I cannot read it just straight through. And clearly the man's mind is off the charts, genius. So this is going to take some time, but it was good for me. It was a good exercise for my mind and spiritually. It was such a good thing to read some of his works. Now I haven't read the whole Summa. That would take me forever. I don't have the time right now. I read a more condensed version with footnotes and stuff, but it was good. I read a hard thing and it really did impact me in many, many different ways. The second thing I would say is read something fully. So, social media has caused our attention spans to drop to about the size of a gnat. And something that I've noticed as a person who writes on my Catholic Pilgrim pages on Instagram and Facebook, I know sometimes people don't read everything that I've written. And one way that I know this is I'll write something that's, mildly lengthy for a microblog. And as soon as I post it, someone will like it. I mean, immediately because of the picture. And I know they haven't read it because it would take a little bit longer for them to read it. And I just think to myself, they have no idea what I said. What if they didn't agree with what I said? They still liked it. And so, because I noticed people doing this to my writings, I made a conscious decision that I will not like anything unless I take the time to read it fully. And the interesting thing is that when I have taken the time to read something fully, and sometimes it's by somebody that I really like and admire and normally like all their stuff, sometimes there's stuff in there that I don't necessarily agree with. And I don't want to like it at that moment because we're not going to agree with everybody on everything. But I would just say, read things fully. Don't just skim through stuff and not give it a good mental focus. The next thing is quality over quantity. And Bishop Sheen talks about that. You don't have to read everything under the sun. He talked about how back in the day, people read a lot less just because there was a lot less to read. Books were not lying around everywhere. But what they did read, they really, really took to heart and poured themselves into it. And the other thing is that we don't want to just take in everything. Bishop Sheen says, if too many ideas are poured into the mind and there are not sufficient juices of the intellect to absorb them, a queer kind of literary constipation follows. There's just too much going on in the mind that you can't even think about anything. And so really we do need quality reading over quantity reading, and definitely don't read anything that's mental garbage. And the last point I would say is sometimes it's good to go back and reread something. Now, when my oldest was in high school, I read through all of the English literature books with her, and I'm doing it again now with my middle daughter. She's going to be a senior, so I've now reread all of these books. And even with just the passing of 4 years, I see it through different eyes. I pick up on different things. I understand more in the second reading. And, I'm going to do it with my son as well. And I know that I'll glean even more from it. And so it is important to sometimes go back and reread something because we'll always get something more out of it. And I know that we think that, I should read something else instead of something that I've already read. But there can be a lot of value in reading something again once you've had more life experiences or you've gone through something difficult. You just see it through different eyes. And so that is all for our discussion on reading this week. If you ever need recommendations or want to know a good classic book that you should start with, please send me an email, write me on my Catholic Pilgrim Instagram or Facebook page, and I will be happy to give you some recommendations. But that is all for this week. I will see you back here for week 32. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.